You want to find your tribe of raving fans. I'm going to help you do it. This is the Digging Deep podcast with 360 Media, where we help you do better business. Hey everybody, this is Justin Lamb, and you're watching episode 13 of Digging Deep, where we help business owners build better businesses. Today I'm joined with owner and physiotherapist Wil Seto from InSync Physio. He's been in the business for almost 2 decades, owning 2 locations, one in Vancouver and one in Burnaby. And he's got an amazing set of physiotherapists. He himself works with his clients, and they've been nominated and won numerous awards, including the Best of Vancouver by the Georgia Straight and the Vancouver Courier Stars of Vancouver. So, Wil, welcome to the show, and thank you for being here today.
Thanks, Justin. It's my pleasure to be on the show today.
Amazing. So, what's been happening, since COVID started?
Well, we closed down right away. Um, March 15th was a Sunday. So timeline-wise, I remember we were just coming back from holidays, um, March 14th. I think that was a Saturday or something like that. And then we were away at Parksville, and it was all surreal because it was happening. All this stuff started blowing up while we were away, and then we came back on the Saturday, um, and then Sunday, Monday rolled around. We actually were still open on the Monday the 16th, and then I got together with some of my core physio group from the clinics, and we talked about what our next steps are, and we decided, yeah, we just got to close it down. And this is before they even issued any mandatory closures, and we decided that that's the best thing to do. And then before we knew it, when we closed down, when we announced our closure for March 17th, every other clinic started to close down. And then a week later, that's when the ministry announced mandatory closures. So we've been basically physically shut down since March the 17th. And yeah, nobody, like RMTs, our staff of, well, our contractors, I should say. We have um, 7 RMTs and 10 physios, and we haven't physically worked since then. And we have taken on telehealth pretty quickly, only for the PTs, for the physios. The RMTs were not allowed to do any kind of telehealth at all. And even the telehealth that we're doing, you know, probably only adds up to, at max, like 5 to 7% of our actual gross.
Hmm. And so, when you get faced with something like this, where you're having to manage a team, from a leadership perspective, where would you know suggest people who are in the health space as a business and operator, like, what steps could they have taken, or what steps should they take, to keep their team, both mentally healthy and prepared and uh, ready for something of this nature? What did you guys do? What did you do?
First of all, like I think it's really hard to prepare for anything like this. Um, like it's a really rare event. Like it's one of these things where a lot of people are sort of drawing the parallels of, like, the Spanish flu and how that happened back in 1918 versus this is the modern age, right? Which presents a lot of other complications, but also a lot of cool things with technology, like our ability to do, like, sort of what we're doing now, like a podcast Zoom type of connection. Whereas, back then, like, everybody was much more disconnected. So I think, the things that we've been doing while this has been going on, I think, number one, really, um, I think the most important thing, number one, is really, really just coming to grips with how you feel about it all and being able to go through those stages of like of grief. I mean, because in reality, like it's a big loss. So there's like losses at many levels. And I think initially, there was like the denial phase, like this isn't happening, and then and then you move through that. And then I remember I was also feeling like quite angry, but it was difficult because it was like not like you're angry at anyone or any person. Like it's just but the anger was there. I was angry at like me, part of it was like myself, or maybe, oh, was there something I could have done, preventing this, and could I have been more prepared, like you were saying, like asking and getting sort of my insight on. But I don't think you can be, right? I think it's moving through those stages and acknowledging them, acknowledging how you feel, and we get together. Our team gets together on a weekly basis to connect, to really see where everybody's at, to really look at how we're going to keep moving forward. And the first week, the first meeting that we had, we talked about telehealth, and really like that was the sort of the game plan. So it was really like accepting and looking at the physical condition of where we're at, but then helping each other like understand and acknowledge the emotional component of what's going on, because it's huge, right? And I think that's actually more important than I think a lot of us realize. That emotional aspect of like feeling. I mean, you feel it. We all feel it. The social isolation, the emotional dread that comes with uncertainty, even though like things are better for us definitely, and for a lot of people now. But there's still this uncertainty that looms over me and a lot of us, of like, what's going to happen, like when is this going to actually reopen, even though we keep hearing the Minister of Health and Dr. Bonnie Henry talk about the potential reopening end of May or June, and that she wants to see at least 2 days of no increased infection rates. It's but there's still this uncertainty of like when and how and what it's going to look like. So yeah,
Yeah,
that's
I
sort
mean,
of.
I totally understand, and I think for leaders of organizations, you know, to help soothe and help ease the people who work with them and work for them. Being a good leader is both being vulnerable and then also being cognizant of emotions that run throughout the organization, and making sure that you address them, making sure that they feel secure. Because, like you said, it's easy to be and feel lost in this time period, and feel helpless. And funny that May is coming up as Mental Health Month, but it's the mental health aspect of it is so much of it is hidden because people don't want to be like the Debbie Downer, or don't want to feel like that person who's Debbie Down. But there are a lot of people who are hurting emotionally, who may not be speaking up about it, and that's something that as leaders we have to be um, vigilant about the signs of those things. So when it comes to, say, work, and the workplace environment for business owners, I think a lot of people, or at least a lot of businesses, have extended health. And one of the things that I think a lot of people have misconceptions about in terms of using their extended health is, trying to front load or do um, only physiotherapy when they have the subsidy in place. So one of the things I really wanted to talk to you about was, how could a person who may have benefits, maybe, wouldn't necessarily come to see a physiotherapist outside of that, how would they be able to adjust, the way they interact with a physiotherapist, so that they have a better course of action throughout, the year as their benefits, continue to expire, or all their sessions kind of expire. Like, what could they better do rather than waiting till like November of the year and realizing that they have 10, 15 physio sessions available, and they're coming to see you weekly
Yeah.
all the way to the end.
Yeah. So, like with the telehealth, which is the video consultations, set up through secure video platforms, with regards to like a physio assessment or treatment, we've been able to get a lot of extended health insurance companies to cover physio, like ranging from like Manulife, Blue Cross, I think Sun Life, and then I think Canada Life is now on board. Like a lot of big insurance companies have made the switch over, realizing that this is actually the demand, and because of that, we've been doing the telehealth or the video conferencing for over a month, up to five, going on our fifth and sixth week now, and so we have been seeing definitely patients for that time period, and have successfully helped a lot of people. But like I was mentioning earlier, um, we we aren't seeing the same amount of volume because people definitely still like and want that hands-on sort of physical touch, right? But there's still a lot of things that in terms of the video conferencing that is beneficial. And especially like when you look at the things that are limited now and the restrictions in place in terms of physical activity, you don't have sports like you normally do, and a lot of it is like stuff that you can do on your own, like running, and other types of in-home exercise program training. And so there are things that will come up. Like we've treated people with like acute sprained ankles, wry necks, and sprain their backs and shoulder issues. I myself have spoken to a good handful of my clients who are like rock climbers, and they're in a tough bind right now, but like just giving them that guidance and direction, with what they can do in the meantime, and what kind of things that are beneficial to help them until they can actually see their physical therapist or physiotherapist in person. It can be helpful instead of waiting, like you said, until like you know midsummer, end of summer, and realizing that oh yeah, like now I can actually go and see a physio. There's still a lot that we can do to help out. So for I think I think that's probably the one thing that we can still keep doing, and obviously it's going to be a limited capacity. So
So are you instructing all your rock climbing patients to boulder around the house, up and down the stairwells and all across the windows, getting them to boulder around the house for exercise?
well, I don't I think I need to. I think they're kind of doing that on their own accord. What I help with is really giving them advice on starting points. Like, okay, so if they've been injured, looking at the starting point of when can they actually start doing like hangboard training, for example. So like a hangboard is a good tool. It's basically a board that mimics climbing holds to certain depths and certain angles, where you can basically train your contact strength for your hands and your fingers. And it's stuff like that, for example, right? Like or like if they've sprained their ankle, like assessing it for them, on video conferencing, and looking at what degree do we think it is based on what we see, and and sort of these other tests that we can't do manually, but we can still do like objectively, and watch them through movement patterns, that we can say, okay, yeah, you can start trying this, and if it feels okay, if it doesn't hurt, then you can try doing, increasing your cardio with this. So basically, um, our advice, or the benefit that we can provide for people like that, is just starting points, um, what to do in terms of preventing it from happening again, and things to do, I guess, related to the starting points, is how to make it stronger in a way that it's not going to make it worse or prevent the delay of the healing, basically.
Mm. So why don't we take COVID aside and let's dive down a little bit. So you just talked about um, people delaying the time of which they go to see a physiotherapist, and in the workplace, I think there's a lot of that where I now more than ever before we're more sedentary, and our movements and our exercise comes from doing classes one off, but we're really not super mobile, and a lot of people are living through pain at work, and that decreases productivity because their mind is being shifted elsewhere. And so what would you recommend for an employer, um, who has workers who are sitting in desks all day long? What could they do to empower their employees, and get them engaged into going to see a physiotherapist for those sore, joints or injuries, without having to bludgeon them over the head or to wait till things get worse, where they're having to take on short-term or long-term disability. What type of things could business owners do from a physiotherapist standpoint to empower their employees?
Yeah, no, that's a good question. And like without these restrictions and without COVID even being one of the factors, like I think there's a few, I think there's a few factors here that help encourage that. I think the first thing is looking at what kind of a healthcare plan do most people have. Like, so if the employer has a healthcare plan in place for their employees, that's also like something that maybe a lot of employees look at. So, do I have the extended healthcare coverage that gives me support for physio? That's probably the first one. The second one is also the culture. So the culture being like, how do you design the way that the people in your company, like how do they motivate themselves in the workplace, and what is their perspective, and what is it like motivates them. So part of that is like, do you have a culture in your company that is generally active? Do they like to do things? And are they in that mindset? Yeah, granted, you may have a job, or your employees have a job where they're sitting a lot, but are you encouraging a type of culture? And this is where, as a leader of any type of organization, are you the one that's encouraging an active mobile workplace? So this can be from something as like in terms of physical space, where you have like a little gym or something like that, to like even do you have like things that you set up on a monthly basis where you all get together and you do like the grouse grind once a month, or do you get out and do something physical once a month altogether? Like, do you guys go and do like a fun adventure excursion like rock climbing or something like that, right? And do you have other people initiating it, and it's not just you? Because that's the other factor too, because if it's always just coming from you, then it's not really as more of an intrinsic motivation as it is more then becomes extrinsic, because you need to be able to have the people within the group light the fire underneath their own butt. So it becomes this extrinsic factor where uh, are they doing it amongst themselves, and so that's kind of the thing. So how do you inspire that? And I think a lot of that comes back down to your leadership. So it's like, do you lead from the top up or the bottom down? So um, I don't know. Those are sort of some things that I think that I've kind of been been running across with regards to designing a culture that that is built on not just positivity but also on proactivity. And
Perfect.
so going back to your question about the whole yeah, the whole thing about um, how do you do that as a leader? Um, you just really have to find ways to inspire people uh, from within.
Hmm. Okay. And I think nowadays it's more and more common, at least as I have conversations with people who are in the workforce, it is common for them to you know pull a muscle or do something silly, but then they just feel like they just leave it alone, and it'll heal up on its own. Um, Now, me having a health background, I'm of the camp that those things should be addressed before they sit and fester and cause other problems. But want to hear from your perspective. For somebody who gets hurt, maybe pulls a muscle for from doing something, maybe not super intense, but they'll, rather than go see a massage therapist, go see a physiotherapist to kind of get it back up and running and properly mobile. They let us fester and let us sit there. What is your take on people who do that, and what would you encourage them to do instead?
Yeah. So that no, that's a good question, and I think I see. It's interesting because when we do see people in the clinic, it's like a lot of them have done the wait and see, and then oh, now I got to come in because it's just not getting better. And so, what do you do sort of in that stage before you come in? Like I, I think it's a it's one of these things. Like it's really tough, and it's kind of like you can only lead a horse to water, right? I mean, you can only give them the information, and I think there's only so much of that you can do until they decide, right? Until they decide, yep, this is the pain point. I need to go do something about it. And quite often, that's a lot of what we see. Like a lot of people end up reaching a pain point. Granted, that's not like 100% of our clientele and the people that we see, because there are people that are proactive for sure, right? But we do see like definitely a large portion of people that are like, this is the pain point, or they've had an acute injury and they know they got to go and get it taken care of. And I think it's tough, like when you have the nagging injuries that you can just let go, like the chronic Achilles tendonitis, or turns into a tendinopathy, which is a longer term issue. It I think it comes back down to it basically boils back down to like how important is it for that person, and then as someone, like say if they are my employee, how do I how do I help them see how important it is to get better? So, um, and part of what we do, obviously, with the people that we hire is like we want to hire people that are proactive, right? Um, and then there's a lot more sort of a positive raw material, or you know something that you can work with. So I think really it's just like, as long as you give them the information and the data. Like, for example, studies have shown that once you like get into a car accident and you got whiplash, and especially if it's mild, getting starting to work on your mobility. And actually, physiotherapy is a combination of working on manual therapy and hands-on techniques to increase your mobility, but also specific types of exercise, and just like basically doing things that are not aggravating it is going to actually help with its recovery a
Hmm.
lot faster, instead of like putting yourself in a neck brace, which is like totally old school, and then taking it out in about 4 to 6 weeks. I mean, if it's severe and you got really bad whiplash, then yeah, like that might actually be good if it's some other more serious issues going on. But like for the mild cases, you want to start to get it moving, which basically, reinforces that notion of, um, you know, that motion is lotion, right?
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah, I think movement. I mean, the body, I think, was designed for movement and not to be in a static position for an extended period of time. I think the muscles, the fascial tissue, they all start to stiffen. They don't become they start to become less malleable, less flexible with bed rest. I just think bodies are not designed for that for an extended period of time. Well, why don't I switch gears here, because I know that you've been an avid sports a competitor for much of your life, and one of the things I think would be interesting to kind of pick at would be to see how sports, competitive sports particularly, has impacted you as a business owner, business leader, um, and what type of things and traits that come from being an elite athlete, and how does that translate, to a business owner and the type of life and way that you operate.
Yeah. So personally speaking, so my sporting background, I used to I used to do well. I did volleyball for quite a while. So this is going way back when I was even in like grade 9 high school. I started off playing competitive volleyball for the high school team, and then what I really got into was actually more competitive Olympic freestyle wrestling,
Hmm.
and I did that for six years. And I started off, kind of at a lower level, and then worked my way up, wrestling for a club, and basically wrestled for the province of Ontario. This is back in the Durham region, and then went to kind of a semi-high level, but not like I never ended up getting into like the Olympic level. So the Olympic freestyle wrestling is just basically called Olympic freestyle because it's a style of wrestling. So I did that for several years, and then after that, I ended up playing a competitive ultimate, which was a more kind of like around post undergrad university, and I did that for a few years. And then most of my training also in relation to, with competitive ultimate was involving running. And I kind of got into a little bit more long distance running, and I joined the track team at the university where I had finished my undergrad and was about to go into the physio program. And yeah, and I really like that. And it was a team training sessions for sure, with regards to cross country and sort of that track element, which I really loved because you kind of work together as a team to help each other basically get faster and work on your endurance. And it was also a mindset thing. So with my background in wrestling and competitive ultimate, and then ultimately like as more non-competitive but more as an avid rock climber, um, I really took a lot of the like things that I did at a younger age and started to apply the things that I did with the training that I did with wrestling and ultimate, and apply it to what I do now to try and stay fit, and also just with my avid fitness routine that I have with like rock climbing. I think the things that I've learned essentially from all of this and how it applies to being a better business owner and a leader in the regard of leading people is, first of all, you need to be very self-disciplined. Like you need to be able to develop that self-discipline through consistency, and I think that's the one of the most important things that I think you can have as a successful leader, um, because through that you lead by example, and then you can um, basically, leading by example, then you have more credibility in being able to talk to the people that work for you, that you want to lead. And as you do that, like, I'm doing that to the, like even now, like as I work in the clinics, I'm in the trenches with them, right? I treat patients and I love it, and we meet regularly, and we talk about things that we come across, and That's one of the biggest things I miss, actually. You know, is that getting together. So having that self discipline, um, and then I think, you know, just being able to work hard, being a hard worker, to be able to, you know, get up and keep going after being beaten down, um, or failing. You know, and I think the working hard and learning from your failures, they go hand in hand, because um, I've failed a lot, like a lot, a lot, a lot. And if I didn't take, what did I learn from this every time I failed, then I don't think I would be able to improve and get better, right? And that is so super important, and so like that ability to be able to actually learn from your mistakes is what will make you better. And I think the last thing really is having an emotional bandwidth and the emotional capacity to be able to, um, like we talked about earlier, just to be able to be vulnerable and work through, acknowledging where we're at and how we're feeling in the moment. Uh, and really, a lot of that is just using your empathy and, um, being compassionate towards others. And like, obviously in our profession, that's what we're doing, in treating people. But also, like, when you're leading people, you got to put yourself in their shoes all the time. And when you're leading, like, a group of like 15 to 20 people, sometimes it's difficult. So, um, yeah, there you have it.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. I think being, a competitive athlete, a lot of things that you do is you're constantly in a state of improvement. One little extra piece to make you a better competitor, and I think that translates as a business owner in that you're always looking for a little bit more, to do a little bit better, to be better than your last at bat. And there's a common saying out there that you're only good as your last at bat, so to speak. Your last, whatever your last execution was. And I think when you're in a place where you're a leader, and you bring all this, to the table, it is really interesting that I find some of the best leaders actually come from, competitive sporting backgrounds. Now, we talked to you touched on it briefly, and that was the ability for, you to access a wide range of emotions, as a leader, and in a competitive space, it's highs and lows, and you get the thrill of winning, and then of course like the sourness of loss and defeat. So, let's just we translate that now to where we're at in today's society, where COVID
Mhm.
is taking, that beating down. you know do you have any particular tools or any mental strategies that you use to help you, you know, weather through those highs and lows, or do you just take the swings? Like, do you just accept the swings that they are? Do you have some mental tools, that you utilize or implement to kind of keep you a little bit more even keeled?
Yeah, no. So, first of all, I think you need to go set goals. And when you set your goal, it provides you this vision of what you want. And when you have that, then you can transport yourself from where you're at now to where you want to be. And so, in a lot of ways, when you're like envisioning and you're imagining what you picture, uh, you where you want to go, and in your goal of whatever it is, career, personal, whatever that is, right? You know, you start to also transport like your emotional well-being from, like, like, say something is going on and you wake up on the wrong side of the bed, and then you just feel a certain way. and then you have your coffee and your breakfast and you start to like envision your goal, you can transport that and it, emotion of that, waking up on the wrong side of the bed feeling to like your emotional state, right? That's so important. And I think related to that is your ability, my efforts in trying to always go from like like a certain low state that I may find myself in for whatever reason. Like I got bad news that something happened to one of my best employees or one of my best physios or something like that, and then trying to like basically rebound off of that and looking at, okay, well, what's my overall goal, and being able to basically just do a state change, changing changing the way I feel. So not to say that I'm like, you know, not acknowledging my emotions, but it's just like looking at, okay, you know what, this is how I want to be if I want to try and work towards this, because ultimately I I'm less efficient and less creative and less all those things that make me more productive if my state is lower, right? So there's a time and place to be able to acknowledge that, and I think it's important. But like to always look at, okay, so what state do I want to be in, and connecting with my goal state, right? And so I think those are things that I try and utilize on a daily basis. The other thing that I think is also really important with respect to what you're asking, I think, is connected to that emotionality, is really figuring out, why do I do what I want to do. And I was actually talking about this with my physio group about, another group that I meet with uh, that are really like-minded in terms of entrepreneurs, and they really, it was interesting because we had a discussion last week about, what can we do right now to pivot our current situation so that way we can survive in order to thrive once the current situation passes.
Mhm.
And it's not an easy answer, and and that's okay, because I think it, for us at least, right? And I think that there's just so many factors for us to consider, and obviously the physical aspect of what we do is the most important part. And so it got me thinking about all these other things that we can do, and then I started realizing, wow, this could be part of our new vision and goal once things go back to normal. And and I guess what I'm trying to say is that being able to like, um, really go back and also change and revisit your goal, and going back to that goal state and your emotionality related to that, right? Is super helpful for me.
Hmm. Well, it sounds like you've done a lot of personal development work, and that leads me into my next question, which is I generally like to provide some extra value to the people who are listening to this. What type of, if you were to pick one piece uh, of material or one piece of influence that gave you a really big pivot point in your career, in your life, something that a person can either look up, read, what would you choose if you were to say one
Mm,
thing that really made an impact on your life? What type of material would you suggest? What book, what podcast, whatever it is? Give me a
yeah,
piece.
yeah. There's just so many, Justin.
Aha, yeah, this is the hard part. So I'm going to make you narrow
Yeah,
it down to one. If you said,
I know, I know.
you got to
I
read
can't,
this.
I can't. No, I can't just narrow it down to one. But I'll tell you one that's a little bit more fresh in my mind. Not because I've just read it recently. Actually, it was a book that I had finished reading, probably about a couple months ago, and I might have mentioned it to you before personally. It's called Mindset,
Hmm.
by Carol Dweck, or Dweck. I might be pronouncing her last name wrong, but it talks about what a growth mindset is versus a static or a non-growth mindset. And It was an interesting read because I mean, so she's a researcher, and she comes from this background where she wrote this book that was also really heavily referenced based on previous studies and research, which is why I really liked it. But then the way that it was written, it was a very good, easy read. Like it wasn't like scientific read. It was sort of a really cool kind of you know I don't know how to best describe it. It's definitely something where um, I got a lot out of it, um, in the sense that I was able to actually look at all the things that I've done in my previous like ventures of learning and growth, and it all tied all that together. And the last chapter, the last portion of that whole book, I thought was actually really cool too because it talked about how the growth mindset, kind of like what Simon Sinek talks about the infinite game. And this is where I'm talking about how like it it sort of meshes in with a lot of other things. And like Simon Sinek talks about the infinite game, and the growth mindset is like it never ends. Like, and it's not just like, oh, you have a growth mindset. Oh, okay, yeah, I'm going to apply these principles of growth mindset, and I'll have a growth mindset. It's not like you arrive there, right? So it's like a process. It's basically um, a process of discovery and learning, and that's the process of a growth mindset. And I think that that growth mindset, when I look back about everything that I've done in my life that I feel like has been an accomplishment, like um, the clinics to I guess even more further back, or even during the time of running my clinics, is like I was telling you about, I'm an avid rock climber. So I set a lot of avid rock climbing goals. And so what I mean by that is like I'll look at certain things in terms of rock climbing as a project that I want to ascend or climb up on. And some of them seem like will seem physically impossible. And I remember some projects that I've actually set as a target or as a goal, and thought, oh yeah, I'm never going to get that this year. And I remember one specifically where I ended up. I mean, I did try it initially without um, really thinking much about it, and then I left it alone for like 2 years, thinking that I would never get it. But then this like 2 years later, and 2 years of like doing a lot of personal work, and then realizing my potential, I started going through a goal setting with this specific rock climb. And I thought still, even then, oh yeah, I'm never going to get it this year. This year will just be like, oh yeah, I'm going to get stronger and then I'll get it eventually. Maybe next year or the year after. I got it in 6 weeks. So um, I use the reference of rock climbing because it's one of those things where you either get up the thing or you don't.
Mhm.
And I think mindset is has really been one of those books that's been really been really cool to read, and it really helps me tap into a lot of these other things that I've learned.
Cool. Well,
Yeah.
thanks so much for sharing that with us, and thanks so much for being on on the show. Really do appreciate it. It's great to talk to you about health and how it relates to to the workplace, and how people can take the time out to really still work on their health, even though we're not able to see each other in person. That you offer that in telehealth. So I really do appreciate you being on the show today.
Well, thanks for having me, and thanks for letting me ramble.
No worries.